Good afternoon. Thank you for joining Michelle Berry in conversation with Jamie Tennant. On the right hand of your screen is a chat box. Please use the same chat box to ask questions to our speakers. On this very chilly day, so we're here to discuss Everything Turns Away, published by Hamilton publisher Woolsack and Wynne. So we're here to discuss Everything Turns Away, a domestic thriller that begins on September 11th of 2001. My name is Nancy, and I'm tremendously happy to be here talking with you about words in the world. I will take a moment to acknowledge that the city of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional terraces of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabeg to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase of 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, the city of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. So we encourage you to find Michelle and Jamie's publications at local independent bookstores like Epic Books at their Lock and Sherman Avenue locations, King West Books in Westdale, The City and the City on Ottawa Street, and all retailers that support books and literacy. Michelle Berry is the author of 3 books of short stories and 5 previous novels. Her short story collection, I Still Don't Even Know You, won the 2011 Mary Score Award and was shortlisted for a 2011 Relit Award. And her novel, This Book Will Not Save Your Life, won the 2010 Colophon Award and was longlisted for the 2011 Relit Award. Her writing has been optioned for film and published in the UK. Berry was a reviewer for the Globe and Mail for many years, teaches online for the University of Toronto, and is often a mentor at Humber College. Berry now lives in Peterborough, Ontario. Jamie Tennant is a broadcaster, journalist, and author in Hamilton, Ontario. He is the program director of 93.3 CFMU, where he hosts the books and literature program and podcast Get Lit. His second novel, River Diverted, is set for release next fall. So I'll pass things over to Jamie, who will begin the conversation. Thank you, Jamie.
Hey, no problem at all. Thanks very much, Nancy. And thanks to Kate, who's behind the scenes hidden, doing some work for us here and making sure that we look good. And thanks to Michelle. Hey, we're talking face-to-face-ish now, which is wonderful.
Finally.
Right? Michelle has been on Get Lit twice. First to talk about her previous book with Woolsack and Wynne, which is called The Prisoner and the Chaplain. And now with Everything Turns Away, which is this book. So you know what it looks like when you go to your bookstore to pick it up, which of course you're going to want to do for sure. How are you doing today, Michelle?
Pretty good. I'm cold, but I hear not as cold as you.
Yes, my heat is out, and I believe there's a strange voice coming up from the basement, which I take to be the heating fellow. And hopefully by the time we're done, it's all going to be great. It has to happen on the coldest day of the year. That's just the only way it can go, right? So. Well, let's talk a little bit about you for those who might not know too much about you. How did you get into this wonderful world of writing? Was it something you've always done? Was it sort of before, after you worked for the Globe? I mean, you've been a journalist. Did it all go hand in hand, writing fiction and writing short stories?
Well, actually, I wasn't a journalist. I became a fiction writer before and got the gig doing book reviews on the Globe because of that.
Okay.
So, but no, all the way through school and even my childhood, I wrote all the time. My dad is an English professor and my mom is an artist. And I sort of didn't have any idea there was any other career out there but the arts. And my parents encouraged me all the time to write. I was constantly writing. And then when I finished my undergrad at U of T, I took some creative writing courses and screenwriting courses and things like that, and fell in love with doing that. I published my first short story when I was in grade 12, actually grade 11 and 12, 2 years in a row. But I just went from there, and I've always been, with my master's degree, I was encouraged to do creative writing by Connie Rook. I don't know if anybody knows Leon Rook's writing. He's a famous Canadian writer. His wife was a very good editor, and she helped me out a lot. So it's just something I've always done. My friends in high school say they remember me scribbling all the time, constantly.
And before we get into it, because you're going to do a reading from the book, there's a sign over your shoulder there. I don't know if it's left or right, because I can't tell if your mirror flipped in this image, but that's your other thing that you do, Hunter Street Books. And I
Not
guess
anymore.
Not anymore, no.
Anymore.
And now, when did that end? Because you were still doing it in October when we last spoke.
December 9th was the last day I took any orders, and December 30th, right before New Year's Eve, I closed the whole thing down. But yeah, for 5 years, I ran the independent bookstore in Peterborough, Hunter Street Books. I owned that. And in the last 2 years of the pandemic, I was online doing it and delivering and things like that. So I finally closed it off just to get back to my own writing. It's a full-time gig, and it's a lot of work and a lot of pressure. And I feel light now. I feel very light. But I kept the sign that hung outside of the door.
Cool. Well, it makes for good decor in the background. It's
Exactly.
a conversation piece, obviously, because we just had a conversation.
Yeah.
The book. Let's talk about. Tell us a little bit roughly what it's about, and then perhaps read your first selection.
Sure. I've written down what it's about, because I find as a writer, it's about 5 billion things to me. So it's so hard when I know this whole thing to put it into a short little thing. So what I'm saying now is everything turns away as a domestic literary thriller, and that it starts with a disastrous dinner party in Toronto the night before September 11th, 9/11. And it starts with a babysitter who witnesses a horrific murder and then vanishes. It's about two not very likable characters, these couples, sorry, not even characters, so 4 people whose lives are turned upside down from these events, the murder and the missing babysitter. And it's not really a book about September 11th. It's more that the story is set against the backdrop of 9/11. And there's so much more that it's about, but I'm putting it in a little paragraph for you.
That's a good idea. Sometimes it's hard to, I would have to do the same thing, because people would ask me, and you'd think I've told people enough that you'd think I would know what to say, but it comes out differently every time.
No, because each time you talk about your book, something else is more important to you in it. So
exactly.
You want to get that across.
Imagine what it's like for readers then. How differently they're going to respond to the book depending when they read it. Well, set us up for the section that you're going to read for us.
Okay, I'm going to start on the first chapter. There's a prologue before the first chapter, but I thought it was a little too gruesome for the people today. But this is Sophie and Paul have just had a dinner party. It's a couple. They're in Toronto. It's chapter 1, and they're in a bit of a spat. They're arguing. So I'll just read a little bit of this. Sophie thinks much later that a lot of it began with the butter dish, a Wedgwood butter dish, blue and round with a solid silver lid and beautiful creamy Greek goddesses on the side. The butter dish is what sets her off, Paul's grandmother's butter dish. Sophie carries the butter in from the table and thumps it down on the counter beside Paul. His hands are in the sink, up to the elbows in soapy water. Jesus, Sophie, you almost broke my grandmother's butter dish. What do I care about butter or dishes, she says, and walks back into the dining room. He said his butter dish, as if it isn't hers. Back into the kitchen again, this time with the salt and pepper and the crystal shakers given to him by his mother. Sophie plops these down heavily on the island in the middle of the kitchen. Salt and pepper, she wants to shout, but she'll wake the baby. I suppose these are yours too? Who cares? Another sip of wine. Paul is drinking the leftover wine in all the glasses from the dinner party. Helen had dry white wine. Sophie had rich red. Alan had beer. Alan stuck with beer all night. Paul doesn't want to sip Alan's beer. He drinks out of Helen's glass and wonders if this is what it would be like to kiss her. He tastes her lipstick on the edge of the glass. Sophie brings in the tablecloth. His, hers, she thinks. Shake it outside. What do you know, she hisses. Shake it outside. But she goes to the back door and opens it into the chilly night air and shakes the cloth out onto the rose bushes off the porch. The light goes on with the motion detector. She watches the crumbs scatter. Paul has turned the radio on while he washes dishes. The dishwasher is chugging along beside him. He whistles to Mozart. He drinks out of Helen's glass. Sophie comes back inside and kicks the cat out of the way. She stops and listens to the noises around her. The radio, the dishwasher, Paul's whistling, the swish of water on plates, the cutlery clinking. It was a good dinner, Paul says. The chicken was too dry. Sophie, Paul says, lighten up. I'm going to stop there.
Okay, awesome. A little introduction to these people who already sound maybe a little suspect in some ways. The last time we spoke, you told me that you don't like happy-go-lucky characters who do everything right.
Yep. No, I like people with flaws.
Well, you succeeded in creating 4 characters at least who are fairly flawed for sure. What is it about that interests you so much? And we'll answer that, and then I'll have a second part to the question.
I just think anybody who's perfect is really quite boring. I think flaws that people have, and especially if they're aware of them, and a lot of my characters are aware of their flaws in little ways, not all their flaws, but some of them, they're a lot more interesting to me. They feel guilt, they feel sadness, they feel anger at the way they're behaving. So I find that really fascinating. I find that anybody who doesn't seem to have flaws, because there's no one in this world who doesn't have flaws, but anybody who doesn't seem to have flaws is boring to me. They don't have a personality, a dimension that is much more interesting.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of the things that not a lot, but many things I've read that involve flawed characters, they always seem to be frustratingly unself-aware. Or self-unaware? I don't know what the term is. And you think to yourself, like, how does this person not know that they're being a jerk? And one of the first things I noticed reading this book was that they absolutely do. It doesn't mean they can stop their behavior, but they know that they shouldn't be doing these things. Is that one step towards making flawed people more likable for you, or do you just feel that it's realistic that way?
I think it's more realistic that way. I'm really following what these characters do based on who they are, and I don't know many people. I mean, I'm overgeneralizing here because there's so many people who have flaws they don't know anything about. But a lot of people around me, and they know they have them, and they can't stop having them, and myself included. I talk too much. And I know I'm doing it, but I can't stop, And I'm talking about small flaws too. I'm not talking about giant serial murder flaws and things like that.
Well, these characters, as flawed as they are, do seem to have some legitimate issues in their relationships, the 2 couples. And it's how they deal with these issues that shows the flaws, not so much that anyone is to blame for anything, no sole person. Was this kind of, oddly fun to explore, like what it is between these people and how it's falling apart and or not, if you know what I mean? Yes,
it's really fun. And imagine sitting around for 3 years writing a book that, and where everybody is just happy-go-lucky all the way through and not arguing. If you put 2 people in a room and they start to argue, it's a lot more heightened. You've got climax, you've got all kinds of interesting things going on. If everybody's just being sweet and nice to each other, that's not going to work, and it's not going to pique our interest. But these people are very young in the book. I mean, I'm in my 50s now, so they're like 30 around that age. They've just had new babies, both of them, and they're trying to establish themselves around each other. They're pretty newly married. They have some powerful careers, some of them. And they're trying to sort of find out who they are. And through that, they've got all these bad things that come out about them that I feel like in the future, if you went back to these people at 70, I think they would have figured it out by then, But right now, they're in the midst of everything. And I think the 2 women of the dinner party, Helen and Sophie, I think they might have a bit of postpartum problems going on there as well.
It's interesting in that you talk about these people and their relationships kind of at the moment turning a little bit sideways, if not upside down. And then, as we discussed last time, the world around them has turned right upside down. I'm not even talking yet about September 11th. We'll get to that. But I'm talking about, of course, the discovery that the next day, very close to them in their neighborhood, there's been this horrific murder. Why did you want to juxtapose these 2 things, this horrific event with the less horrific, but nonetheless problematic events in their lives?
I think that how can I put this? That they are, what I was interested in, I guess, is the fact that they are so consumed with themselves, and then you give them something else that's horrific and horrible, and they still stay consumed with themselves throughout this. That interested me because it's how, it's actually the title is about this. Is Everything Turns Away is about it's a poem from from Auden called Musée des Beaux-Arts, and it's about Icarus falling from the sky, and Auden is sitting in an art gallery looking at this painting by Bruegel, and Icarus is falling from the sky, and everyone around him is not doing anything. This guy is just falling from the sky, and they're off doing their own thing and paying attention to their own thing. So if you put my characters next to this huge world event or the murder and all this sort of stuff, they still are focused only on themselves, which I found very interesting. And so I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's kind of what I was playing with. In the poem, it says everything turns away from the scene of a disaster. And so I was kind of trying to understand these disasters going around them and how we can't just focus on the disaster. We also pull it back to ourselves.
Well, I mean, this is why your book is timely now, right? Of course. I mean, there's so much going on in the world, even if we didn't have a pandemic, we'd still be sort of blown away by how much is going on in the world. But you can't deny the personal and the emotional and these things that happen to each of us at this time. It would be weird if everyone was only focused on this global pandemic and not slightly concerned about their lives,
But you kind of feel guilty about it, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is a weird thing, and that's one of the things that you explore as well, which is kind of interesting. There are a few other characters in the book beyond these couples who go on from this night. This murder happens they find out the next day, and they deal with it and deal with each other, and hopefully come to some sort of resolution, which we shall not spoil for anybody. But of course, in there you have the babysitter who, as you said at the top, witnesses this horrific event. We have the sister of the victim, who pops up at one point in the book as well. And then there's another character that is us, because you've written in the second person in this character and named you. That was an interesting choice. Why did you make that choice?
I thought I was very interested at the time I wrote this in second person narration, and I wondered how I could even write an entire novel in second person narration. But it's really impossible, because you this, you that, you this, I don't even know how you would do that. I'm sure somebody has, and I just haven't read it. But I was interested in stepping away and telling my readers about something somehow. And so I put it in the voice of a character doing that. And I had so much fun with him. I don't know what his purpose is, except for to say that this is how he feels about everything in a more sort of direct, bossy kind of way to everybody. Although he's not really that bossy, I don't know. But I had so much fun with this guy, and I still think of him as the only character I don't know very well in this book, and he interests me every time I sit down and read him. He's very traumatized. His wife has died recently, and the events of 9/11 have just happened. And he's the one in the book who has taken in 9/11 into his soul. And even though he's in Toronto, he's traumatized by it. He can't go up buildings anymore. He needs to see a psychiatrist. He's on medication, and he somehow gets involved in the whole story. But he also gives you a break in the reading of it. So you're reading along and you're following these two couples who do all these things. And then all of a sudden you've got the you character again, who sort of makes you able to stop and focus and remember 9/11 and then move on from there. But he still baffles me sometimes, and I don't know why.
Well, it's interesting because when you think about it, no one reading something in second person is under the impression that it's actually them. Yet the more you say you're a dentist and you have to be somewhere at 3 o'clock, and the less you connect, there's got to be a little bit of connection in using the word you. So maybe that's why you is the character you know least, because you gave the least details about his life.
That's true.
Which is interesting.
He can't say that. He can't say, well, the narrator can't say all the things that you just said about, like, you are 5 feet tall and you are this, and it doesn't make sense in the things.
Right, exactly. Well, we're going to read a section from that just so we can get a feel for how that sounds. And then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about maybe the milieu of the setting of the story.
Okay, this is from chapter 16. It's the whole chapter. It's only a page long. So, and this is you. He doesn't have a name. You see in the newspaper that the incidence of bed bugs in fancy hotels has skyrocketed. People come home from vacation covered in itchy, oozing sores, rich people. And you are worried about the dead prostitute stuffed into the box spring in a hotel, the one you saw in the movie Shortcuts. You have never once thought about bed bugs, but now you'll think of them every time you stay anywhere but home. You are relieved for a minute that your wife is gone. This is the kind of information she would have taken and run with, the kind of information that would have meant you had to pack your own sheets and pillows and pillowcases whenever you went on a trip. But you don't go anywhere now. Not anymore. Not alone. Just walk the neighborhood with your dog. And there are strange things in the neighborhood, but not as strange as what you read in the newspapers. If you ever do travel, though, you know that you will pack pillowcases. There is also a cobra loose in Toronto in a boarding house. It is in the walls, a big cobra, someone's poisonous pet. A man, Mike, has been hired to sit in the basement all day and listen for it. He is to call the people who will catch the cobra when he hears it. What does a cobra sound like? Someone asks Mike, and you read that he says, it sounds like a dead body being dragged across the floor. You can imagine the sound. It haunts you at night as you lie alone in your bedbug-free, lonely bed and stare at the ceiling. As you listen to the planes headed to the island airport coming in and taking off, the helicopters heading over the city, constant traffic above you, around you, noise that makes you tremble, dead bodies being dragged across the floor. You wonder if the dog you bought on the internet, Gibson, feels the same way you do. You wonder if there are bugs in his bed in the living room. It upsets you to think this, and so you hum a bit and whistle to get the thought out of your head. And then you wash his dog bed. Your wife hummed when she cooked, when she cleaned, when she bathed. Your wife was a hummer, a hidden musical genius. When she was young, she would whistle, but whistling turned to humming. Then, when she got sick, the humming got quieter, more contemplative, and then it stopped altogether. Sometimes you wish that something exciting would happen to you, something that would take away your thoughts of your wife, of her death, that would temper your grief. You thought that by getting the dog, you wouldn't be so lonely, but instead, his needs make you feel even more desperate and alone. Tonight, when you took your dog for a long walk, you saw some strange things. A man in his window scraping at his tongue with his fingers, looking out at you. Another man sneaking down the side of the same house, going towards the back. The sightings of both of these men were enough to make you forget to pick up Gibson's poop, but they weren't exciting enough to focus your attention away from your depression. You and Gibson walked on, and then Gibson broke free from his leash and ran straight into someone's backyard. He must have pooped again. He came out with his own excrement on his tail. You could smell it. When you went to grab him, you accidentally touched his tail and got it on you, and the smell of it made you gag. And then you wiped your hands on the grass as carefully as you could, wiped hard and long, and then carried on, careful to hold tight to his leash, careful to wash your hands as soon as you got home. Nothing more happened tonight. September 11th, 1 a.m. Gibson went to sleep on his clean, bedbug-free bed. You lay awake, staring at the ceiling. It's interesting in that chapter, all the dropped hints. Did you notice that? Like,
yes.
For people who haven't read the book, all the things that happened before come into this man. This man kind of always sort of contextualizes everything for you. You know, there's an incident in there with the poop on his hands that we notice ahead of time, but we don't know what's happened. And now all of a sudden we're aware of it through his narration.
I love the little, not such a little detail, but the detail of the cobra. Like, really? Is that something that happened?
It's interesting, Jamie. All the use sections, I had to cut those a lot because they were in 2006 when I started writing this book. In the Globe and Mail, there was a back section called, I don't know what it was called, but I thought it was called Facts and Arguments, but I don't know if that's right. But it was this whole list of strange things that had happened in Toronto, or I guess the Globe and Mail could have been national, but I think it was just Toronto over the last week. And it would be in the Saturday paper. And it was strange things like that, like this, the one guy in the thing gets a dog over the internet, and that hadn't happened before. And that was in the paper, and the cobra across the floor and the bed bugs. It was all facts from the Globe and Mail. And there were a whole bunch of those all the way through the whole novel. And my editor sort of said, you're overdoing this. There was too much.
But that would be so fun, though. I can see wanting to include
I love
all
that
stuff
section
in there for sure.
Yeah.
There's such a different tone to those sections. You're right, and it's a break for that reason as well, for the reader, because the tone shifts so noticeably. You mentioned that you wrote this book in 2006. And you'll notice that we all know it's not 2006 anymore.
Oh.
Right? Tell me, what was it that made you want to write something set in the post 9/11 days back then? And then why didn't you take it all the way and try to get it published back then?
Well, at the time, I mean, I lived in Toronto, and I was quite affected by 9/11. I had turned on the television to watch the news in the morning while I was getting ready for work. I was working I was writing novels actually at the time and teaching online. And I had turned on the television and saw it live, saw the reporter, saw the first plane hit. Then I saw, so I saw the whole thing live and was quite affected by it because my children at that point were at daycare. My husband was at work, and I was sort of alone in the house. And at the time, people who didn't live through it don't realize that we didn't know if the world was ending, especially when the Pentagon and when the other field plane went down. And we had no idea what was happening. It just kept happening and kept happening. It was 4 or 5 hours of just constant bombardment with this stuff. And it had never really happened like this on North American soil before, so it was quite traumatic. So I somehow had to figure out how I could get that into my writing. And I couldn't figure out how to do it, and for years and years, and then finally pulled it in, but wrote this book that has some humor in it, and it's not really focused on 9/11. It just has 9/11 in the background, and people are they stop every once in a while and say, "Oh my God, 9/11 happened," or "What's happening today?" Or, but all the other things in their lives are taking on more of a serious tone in their face and in their mind than this is. But so I just wanted to play with that, and it took till 2006 until I could write that. And then in 2006, we started sending it out. My agent started sending it out places, and everybody loved it. All the publishers liked it a lot, and I got some really great comments. But everybody kept saying it's too soon. It's too soon, and especially the humor and the fact that it's not fully focused on 9/11. It's not about 9/11, and so everybody was kind of hemming and hawing about it. And then I put it away for a while. I just thought, I don't need any more rejection. So I put it away. And then I pulled it out. I kept thinking about it because I knew there were parts in it that I really loved. And I loved images of it still were in my head 10 years later. And I pulled out the first chapter, the one I read just a few minutes ago, about Sophie and the butter dish. And at that time, it was chapter 1 in the book. And I sent that to an online journal and said, "Do you guys want this as a short story?" And they did, and they liked it, and they published it. And so I knew that there was something good about these characters in this situation and stuff. And then running the bookstore, I've had no time to write for 5 years at all. And I pulled it out again. And I started thinking, okay, I could edit this at the bookstore. And I'm actually, you could own a bookstore and be an editor, no problem. But you can't be a writer, because you can edit and still talk to people and still sell books. But writing, you're right there in your head. And I was getting grumpy trying to write in the bookstore. And I pulled it out and I edited it for a while. And then I sent it to Paul Vermeersch at Woolsack and Winn at Buck Rider Books. And I said, send it on a Friday. And I said, you probably won't want this. It's got 9/11 in it, and not many people really want to focus on that right now. And this is much before the pandemic. And Paul got back to me Sunday night and said, we want this. This is great. We love this. And then, of course, it was 3 years or 2 years before the pandemic even hit. And now it's sort of applicable to that in the same kind of situation where a big world event has happened and everybody's affected by it. But life still is sort of going on in a different way, And all these characters' lives have been turned around because of it.
It's so funny how the interminable length of the publishing process worked in your favor, maybe in some ways, to make the book more timely. I published. It's going to be out in 3 years. 3.5 years. What? But
it's funny that my first review, one of my first, I guess I had 2 before that, but the big review was in the Toronto Star, and he's the first one, the reviewer, to say that this is very topical for today. And I hadn't even realized that. You know, I was sort of sitting back going, oh my gosh, totally. It's this giant world event that has happened at the same time as other world events. And how do we look at that, and how do we turn away from that? You know, what do we do?
And everything turns away. I don't know what Alden was trying to say, but is that a judgment call or just an observation? Should we turn away? Should we not turn away? How do we not turn away?
The reality of the life, and some people are looking at it, and some people aren't in that painting. And but he mentions the dogs going about their doggy lives, and the horses fighting with or rubbing against a tree. And he mentions just the world continues on in this situation sometimes, and there's nothing you can do about it, really.
Yeah. Well, we as people who went through that event, or people who are going through right now, which is all of us here, it's not necessarily a conscious choice, but you more or less choose how much you do turn away, how much you do pay attention. Now, as the author of a book, how did you know how much to focus on the events in the background of 9/11 and not to focus on? How did you know that balance, what would work?
Well, as you know, you don't really think about that when you're writing. You just start writing. And if you kind of look at this book, there is a lot more mention of 9/11 in the first half of it, and it peters out, right? So I was, I guess, focused on containing 9/11 in this book in some way. And then I think I got interested in the characters as I was writing, and then it became more about them than anything else. So it does kind of, the background sort of fades in after a while in the book. And as I said, you don't know what you're doing until it's on the page, and then you just give it to someone else to edit.
Did you have to sort of spread it a little thinner once you got to the editing part, or was it changed much, or did it remain?
No. The only things that have really changed is the prologue was put in, because I guess I didn't really think of it as a literary thriller before. Now I do, and I understand it, but it's not following the thriller genre as much as it could. It's not as tight as thriller. So that's why they were sort of calling it a literary thriller, because it's kind of more about the people and the dysfunction than it is about solving a crime or figuring out what happened. So at the beginning, I didn't have a prologue, and the prologue is a gruesome sort of description of the murder. And so that really pulls the reader right in, and then they jump in from there. So that was added, and that was really a good thing to do, I think. And then other than that, there were a few things taken out, like the sections of the U character, just a little too much of his weird things that he was noticing. And a little too much of him, really. He was just sort of put in now as sort of the segue or the break between each thing, as opposed to being bigger part of the novel. I think maybe some of the chapters at the beginning were split up a little bit differently. Sometimes I have problems where I go on in one chapter and then I cut it down on another chapter. And so they were all sort of made even. And I really put the character of Grace, the nanny, at the end. I focused on giving her a life a little bit and making her more human, because that's one of my character's biggest flaws, I think, is that they have a Filipino nanny and they don't even remember her name. She lives with them. They forget that she has her own child. And my wonderful editor, Jen Sukfong Lee, who's an amazing writer, mentioned that and said, let's her have a little bit more of a is putting her voice down, So not much editing, but probably a good 6 months worth.
Now let's compare that to the editing you had to do yourself when you metaphorically or not dusted off this manuscript. I know you didn't. You called it up on your computer, but and you're sitting at the bookstore. I mean,
the hardest part was finding it on my computer because it was in a different format.
Oh, that would be a nightmare too. I have stuff I wrote a long time ago on a CD-ROM somewhere. It's like that.
Give it up, Jamie. Just get rid of it. You can't find anything again.
But so you pulled it out. You thought, oh, maybe I can work on this. Were you pleased by what you saw, or did you think, oh, this is going to be a lot of work? Was it a lot of work to take 2006's novel and update it?
No, it wasn't, surprisingly. I was actually very pleased with myself because I didn't know that I wrote so well before. I really rarely read any of my books over again. Once they're out in the public, I do readings with them, but I don't really read them again. And so I don't know how my books stand up. And this one stood up. It really did. It was pretty clean. It was structured right. I didn't have too much problem editing it. I still liked it. And the greatest thing was, and I always used to tell my students this is put your book away for a bit, and because you really do come back to it with totally fresh eyes. I wasn't Michelle Berry who wrote Everything Turns Away back then, but I read it as a new person reading this book. I'm working right now on, I'm working with the two men who bought The Prisoner and Chaplain, my last novel, and are putting it into a movie. They're forming it into a movie, and they keep me on the phone calls with them all the time because I see they know it so well. They know my book so well. They know it better than I know it. But I can get in there and say, I'm reading this as a fresh reader because I have not read this book in 5 years, and I've forgotten everything about it. So no, it stood up, and I was pleased with what I thought of as my little talent. Like I thought, oh, okay, I actually am a pretty good writer, but I mean, that changes every day. I don't think that all the time.
Isn't it funny how you have those moments of
how did I do that, right?
Yeah, exactly. I've done that with stuff I wrote a long time ago, and I'm like, I'm shocked that it's as decent as it is. Like,
really? I usually talk to my dog, so I'll write something and go, then I read it out loud to her, and then I say, wasn't that good? Because I'm amazed that this little paragraph is so tight, and then the rest of the book falls apart. But that one thing is like, I'm always amazed,
Now, I just want to take a quick break and say that I see we're getting some questions in the chat,
Sure.
which is wonderful. We're not going to turn there quite yet, maybe another 5 minutes or so. So if you, we've got questions here from Annie and Sarah and Terry. We will get to those questions very, very shortly. But in the meantime, have you watched or read or listened to a lot of media that has this sort of a vibe, or specifically is like based in and around 9/11? A lot of the stuff tends to be directly about 9/11 in some way or another, but have you checked any of that stuff out, and what's your impression?
Yeah, I can't remember. Loud and Clear, everything's, what is that one?
Incredibly Close. Yeah, I can't remember.
Yeah, that was brilliant. That was amazingly done. But other than that, what has there been in fiction?
I don't know. It's a good question.
No, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure people reference it, and that's an interesting question to think of. What is the pandemic going to be like in the future in fiction? I'm writing a new novel right now, and it's set now, but there's no pandemic in it. There's people are going to dinner parties, they're doing things. But actually, the interesting thing is the characters in my new novel move from the city to a small town to sort of, because it's cheaper. But I was thinking that kind of is what people were doing during or are doing.
Yeah. So I think I lied with the questions, because this does dovetail with Terry's question, and that's the first question on the list. And it was, do you think the pandemic has influenced your writing like 9/11 did?
Yeah, see, now thank you, Terry, but this is that's the new novel. Yesterday I put the last word in the first draft of the new novel, so 241 pages down. But yeah, no, I don't want to write about the pandemic. I also don't think people want to read about it right now, and they might not want to read about it in 10 years. We're tired of it. We're tired of being locked in. We're tired of all this. Well, there are some shows. We watched some movie a while ago. It took place in Paris, I think, where everybody's locked in their houses, and they did a really good job of it. And there's been a few things of that. But I think that'll be short-lived. I think you write a big novel right now that has to do with the pandemic, and it might be popular for 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, Don DeLillo, there you go. Don DeLillo wrote one called, it's called The Silence or The Party or something. It's a small little novella, and it came out last year, and it's all about people being locked in during the pandemic. And you haven't heard of it. I haven't heard of it. It didn't get much press. So I worry about that. And I worry about like losing our history of how we used to relate to people and how we used to hang out to people. If you just have a novel that is all Zoom meetings and stuff, like You know, how you need to touch, your characters need to touch other people. So I'm staying away from it right now, but maybe, you know, it's kind of like I write about the place I am now 10 years from now. Always. I never write about the house. Like I wrote about Toronto, and I focused on Toronto in this book 10 years, 15 years after I've moved from Toronto, you know, because you get to sort of stand back and look at it. And that might happen with pandemic stuff, but I can't see many people being extremely interested in sitting down and reading a book about the pandemic right now.
I think you're going to see, I think you're going to see a lot of fiction that takes place in 2019, and then fingers crossed 2022,
Yeah.
you know, whenever it all ends, kind of thing.
But we may be wrong, and you know what? We the next bestseller might come out having to do with the
True. You just don't know what people's appetites are going to be, right? So now, what about you as a writer? Has being home and dealing with this changed anything? Even if it was just I read a book and it made me write this, has there been any direct effect, do you think, on your creativity?
Yeah, in a way. Well, first of all, I'm an introvert extrovert, so I can only last like a couple hours being an introvert, and then an extrovert, and then I totally have to be. So I've kind of not enjoyed it, but I've settled into this world of staying home. You know, I miss my friends and I miss my parents and things like that. But I have watched a lot more television than I've ever watched in my life right now, and a lot more really well-structured things, like really good shows. It's a renaissance of television and streaming and all that sort of stuff now. And I think that has affected how I'm writing this next novel, because I am kind of intentionally writing another sort of psychological thriller. And I think a lot of the stuff I've been watching on television is that, and because Everything Turns Away is getting such good press, and people are saying such nice things about it, that I think I've found my niche now. You know, I think I've been fluctuating around with dysfunctional family dramas and all kinds of literary things, and short stories and novels, and, you know, the occasional thriller. And then I think I found that what I want to do now, I really like this kind of highly structured thriller, kind of where people's, you know, psychologically they don't know what's going on and things are creepy, but you know, so I think television has really done that. I've had a lot more deep conversations with people because of the pandemic, because it's one-on-one. You're not in a room full of like 20 people. You're talking to somebody one-on-one. And I think I was tired. 5 years of running the store, and I was full-time there. I was usually 6 days a week down at the store. I was tired of having a lot of people come at me all the time, whereas now I can choose to see who I want to see, and so that's been very good for my mental health in the way, but it's not been fun. And I have two daughters whose lives have been really changed a lot through this, and they're doing well, but it's been hard for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely can relate to that, especially with the children. How old are your kids, if I might ask?
The one is 22 and the other one's 25. And
yeah.
The 25-year-old is doing a PhD at UCLA, and she got in right before the pandemic hit. So she spent her first year in our attic in Peterborough trying to do her PhD on Zoom. And here she thought she'd worked so hard, and she thought she was going to LA for her PhD. Now she's there now. She made it there a year later, and she's loving it and doing really well. And the other daughter's doing a master's degree in engineering at Queen's, and she's been stuck on Zoom doing this. She had a good 6 months, I think, at Queen's where they were in class and stuff, but it wasn't the same. So both their lives have sort of, you know, taken a bit of a hit because of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's go to another question then, since it is 2:45. We got 15 minutes left. We'll stick with the questions. Sarah wanted to know, how much do you do your own editing, or how much does your editor direct your novels?
That's a great question. First of all, I am the luckiest writer in the world because I have a dad who's an English professor. So he really does all the grammatical editing and all the typos and all the, you know, gives me some ideas. He reads it like an English professor. And so I really get to think of my book when I'm editing with him. So he does that. My husband is amazing at doing the sort of consistencies. Like if I've mentioned weather in one chapter, it has to be the same weather all the way through. And that's the kind of thing a copy editor would do. But my husband sort of polishes that up for me. And then usually I get a writer friend to do we trade off and we read each other's books and talk about it and where it fits in society today and things like that. So I think in this day and age, you really do have to have a very polished manuscript to send to a publisher at this point. They're not doing much editing, and they won't accept it if it's very messy and if it needs a lot of work most of the time. It used to be back when I started writing that they would really edit like crazy. But luckily, Will Second Wind is so generous with their time, and they're amazing. I mean, Paul Vermeersch was my editor for Prisoner and Chaplain, and then Jen for my Everything Turns Away, and both of them really gave me a lot of help with things. But usually I'm quite polished when the book goes to them. So I've really sort of given them the best I can do, and I think it's very important to do that, especially if you're a new writer. Give them like something that's extremely polished, and then they might change it a little bit from then, but you know, they'll be more likely to accept it if it's very polished.
I think a lot of people, a lot of first-time writers have the fear that it's going to be their book about a young female vet is going to have to be, they're going to come back and say, it's great, but we want it to be about like an older male heart surgeon. And they're worried, they worry if those types of enormous changes happen, but they really don't, do they?
No, they don't. They accept it for what it really is, most people. I did have an editor back when I first started who did at one point during my novel say, what if we made the he character a she character? Like changed the entire thing, the gender was changed. So the whole book was about this female, and then I was going to flip it to male. Like that completely changes everything. My advice also is to get, if you can get an editor who's actually a writer herself or himself, they know they know that you can't change one little thing. You can't change the tense of your book. And then all of a sudden, like the entire book is different then. It's like you have to, so writers tend to be more generous with what they're saying in that they don't screw the whole book up for you, you know. The average, like someone who's gone to school for editing and is just an editor and stuff like that, sometimes they say the wrong thing and it screws up everything. You
know, it's funny, you talk about those types of changes, and it's true. I was writing, not to talk about my book here, but the book that's coming out either in the fall or the spring, I myself changed the gender, luckily near the beginning-ish.
You're allowed to do that.
Wow, just changed everything. It was like, if you're a nerd and you've watched Marvel's Loki and the timelines branching off, that's what it was like. Everything went bananas. It was just a whole different thing.
Yeah, I change tenses occasionally, and whenever I change tense, there you go. I have to start again. The whole book has to start.
And catching it, making sure you changed every instance of present to past or vice, that's a nightmare.
Even the new novel I'm writing, at one point I had a window that was very important in the book, and at one point I boarded it up, and at the other point I stopped boarding it up and took the board off. And that has taken me a week to make sure that all those boards are gone now, right? And then to remember that they're actually gone when I'm still writing it, and you know, so it's very complicated.
Yeah, absolutely.
I find editing like doing a puzzle. I find it's really fun to edit because it's like a puzzle. It's like every day. It's like Wordle. If you're doing Wordle, editing's like that. You sit down and you have this really intense kind of trying to remember everything that you've done before, and you know, and especially if your characters jump around in time a lot or they move all over the place and your structure is a little different in other places. It's fun like a puzzle. It's like doing a puzzle.
It's weird how editing feels so different from the original writing, where I feel like the original writing is way more painful.
Yes.
And even though you can say whatever you want, it doesn't matter. You're going to edit it.
Yes.
Somehow it is so much more, you're through the ringer. Whereas the editing, you're like, I can solve all this now.
Exactly.
It's a weird feeling.
Yep. No, it is.
Annie wanted to know if you have some advice for young writers.
Yes. Yeah. Lots of advice, actually, but I'll just. I found what was really helpful to me was to read like a writer, and that doesn't seem strange. That seems, read what you want to write about, like not about, but what kind of genre you want. Like read a lot of it. Read, if you're writing short stories, read a ton of short stories. Immerse yourself in it so that it becomes really natural to you. Read novels a lot if you want to write novels, and stick with the same size you want, because there is a structure in all these things, and if you follow this structure, you'll take it in and not have to think about it when you're doing your own writing. Share your work with people, because it's a really lonely business. It really is. And if you can talk and get excited about what you're working on, you'll stick with it more often. Really, really polish your work, what we were saying about editing, before you send it anywhere. And please send it places. That's the problem too. A lot of my writers, they would say, oh, well, I think I'm ready now. And then a year later, I think I'm ready now. And a year later. And, you know, maybe you're ready and you're not ready, but send it somewhere and see if what other people think. It's luck. A lot of it is luck. A lot of it talent, but a lot of it is luck. And young writers, there's you could, especially with all this online stuff, you could get out and do like book clubs with people that are about, or writing clubs that are with people that your friends are writing and stuff. Really try to talk yourself through. Treat it like a career. Treat it like it has to be a career. It's not just a fun thing we do. We're not just dabbling in this. If you really want to publish, you really have to focus and take it seriously and learn. You know, I think the best thing I ever did was get my master's degree, or just any kind of degree in English Lit. I didn't just go with a writing MFA or anything. I really focused on what has come before me and what people were doing and why they were doing certain things. And I think that that's really helped me focus on what I want to do in it, but also just have fun, right? You know, like just write and have fun.
Now, let's get specific with this kind of advice. Let me ask you if there's any advice you would have for a young you as a writer. Is there anything that, looking back,
something else.
do something else?
Get a job that pays.
You know, it's funny. It really is not a career you do for the money. I mean, obviously, right? Unfortunately, yeah. But at the same time, there are all kinds of sort of, you know, author adjacent things you can do to help.
That's all you do for the money. Yes. Your advance is not what's going to pay for your life, but the teaching that I do, owning the bookstore, you know, editing I do for some people sometimes. I haven't done that in years though. And yeah, you know, things like that, events, public speaking, things like that. But a lot of writers teach, a lot of them do.
Without luck, the next Margaret Atwood is somewhere in the audience, and so they're going to be like, that was bad advice. Look at me, I'm making a lot of money.
I know, and somebody will out there for sure.
So you've already talked about what you're working on now. I want to take a quick aside, though, because we've got about 5 minutes left, and ask a bit about this film project. What's the heat on that?
Oh,
that's super cool.
Yeah, Prisoner and Chaplain. I've had a few options for film for a lot of my other books, but usually the person just buys it, takes the option. They're buying the option to it. And they either work on it for a bit and then realize it's not going to sell and stop paying you. You know, so you have a contract for maybe 3 years where you get a little bit of money each year from it, and people work on it. But my other ones have been with people who sort of have taken it away and they do what they want with it. And you know, sometimes they give me a call and say, oh, so and so is interested in this or whatever. But this one, the two men who have optioned it, one is a Hollywood actor, and he works down in California, and the other one is a director of a lot of really good stuff in Canada. I'm not even sure if I'm allowed to say who they are, but they're both really established in the community, and they've been working on the pitch Bible right now, which I'm learning all this new technology, and have pulled me in to talk to me about it. And like I said, they know my book better than I do. And for a while they were thinking of doing a limited series, like a Netflix series or something. And now they're focusing more on a movie. It might be a streaming movie or whatever. But Prisoner and Chaplain is about a man in death row, a prisoner in death row, and a chaplain who comes in to talk to him about his guilt before he dies. So it takes place in 12 hours, and there's all these flashbacks and things like that. And I find the whole process so fascinating. They're really nice guys. I've really enjoyed them. In fact, the actor, I've been watching his show on TV every night. So I'll talk to him in the day and then be watching him on my television during the evening. And they're really nice guys. They've pulled in an actor now that I'm meeting with next week to talk to. Probably nothing will happen. These things just sometimes die. But they're really making an effort, and they're really great people to work with, and I'm very excited about it. I'm hoping something happens with it.
Well, I guarantee you every person logged in now is like, who is it? I mean, don't tell us. That's a bad call.
It's not George Clooney.
That's all we wanted to know. If it was Clooney, that's it, you know. What about, so you're working on this other fiction project too that you talked about. What stage of that are you in? Are you in the writing, editing?
Yeah, no, well, yesterday I finished the last sentence on the first draft, and now
241 pages, right?
241 pages. It's funny, about a week ago, I thought I was finished, and I only had 190 pages. So when I went back to do the first edit, I ended up with 241 pages. So I've got it all ready to, now I've got to print it out and give it to my husband first, because it is a thriller, and there's a lot of inconsistencies I think that he's going to need to catch, that my brain is so fried right now that I'm not going to catch them. I'll show you, actually. Would you like to see it?
Sure.
Here's the novel.
There we go. Nice.
So I do things with structure and things like that, where I use sticky notes and map everything out, and that's kind of where I am right now, is mapping everything. And then when I'm finished with my husband dealing with it, I will then edit again and then give it to my agent and see what she thinks. She might say she hates it, and then I start all over again. But
we have one more. We got about 2 minutes left. I think we got one more question, and that's simply, what are you reading right now?
Oh, it's really good. Great Mischief or something it's called. It's by Maggie Sheffield. I can't remember the title, but look up Maggie Sheffield, and it's about a pilot, a woman pilot from years ago who wants to fly planes, and she's this little rebel and everything. And then it flips into the future, and a movie star in California is making a movie about this girl and being a pilot. And so it's kind of, you've got all the old-fashioned historical stuff in one section, and then it pops to the future in California. I think it was nominated for the Booker this year. I think it's called Great Mischief, something like that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm here staring at my phone. I don't think I did it quickly enough, so I didn't find it. But it sounds great, though. And on your recommendation, I think people should probably look it up, Maggie Sheffield. And now I think it's a good time to say thank you to everybody for having been here with us today. I'm going to throw it back to Nancy to say a couple of words.
Yes, and thank you, Jamie and Nancy and Kate. You guys have been really great.
Thank you. Everyone's been wonderful.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you to Jamie, thank you to Michelle. And if you joined us halfway through the conversation, this will go up on YouTube fairly quickly, so you can check out the whole conversation then. So everyone have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Stay warm, Jamie.
I'll try. I'll go find out if it worked.
Okay.